All right, let's go to rational choice theory. Rational choice theory has become a very powerful theoretical approach to studying the political. From the 60s going to the 70s and even to the 80s, there's a kind of very powerful trend within political science itself that was heavily influenced by economics. You know, economics has been regarded by many as the physics of the social sciences. See, remember in behavioralism, there's this kind of trend that um, it wants to be precise, it wants to be methodologically rigorous in its analysis, it has to be neat, precise, logical in all its approach. That's why, behavioralism uh, was more inclined to, a scientific way of thinking. So, in the same fashion, rational choice theory has also been greatly influenced by economics. Because you see, in economics, they can do a lot of computation, formal modeling. They could precisely describe relationships between concepts. They could even do econometrics. They could do prediction, right? Because their method is so precise. And so, it also crept in into the evolution of political science. And it became a very powerful trend during that time, to the point that if you're not doing rational choice theory, then your study will be regarded as a second grade study compared to those studies being done by economists, political economists, rational choice theories, or those studying public choice theory, social choice theory, and even the collective action problem. Right? So that's how influential rational choice theory was in political science. Um, well, it has a very distinct framework. It has a very distinct understanding or approach to studying the political. It is deeply rooted in economic principles. And it emphasizes the role of the individual in shaping political actions or political outcomes and events and what have you. Okay? So, rational choice theorists assume, just like in economics, that human beings are rational beings, right? They are rational creatures. When you say rational, it means they are rational actors who tries to maximize utility, right? They try to maximize utility. And what does it mean? I'll give you an example so that you can understand. Let's say there are two possible roads that you could undertake. The first one, it will take you 1 minute to go from point A to point B, which is your destination. And the other route, which will take you 1 hour, right? 1 hour. See? Can you imagine that? So let's say the 1 minute road is a good road, straight. The other one is zigzag. Let's even say it's even rough. That's why it will take you 1 hour. Now, if you're a human being, you want to go from point A to point B, what will you choose? Certainly, you'll choose the first option. You see, that's what being rational is. You try to maximize utility. You look at, you try to calculate. Rationality is, in a way, comparable to the term calculations. Okay? You try to calculate what path or what choice will allow me to be better off or will lead me to be better off compared to the other choices. Right? I think the term there is better off. Right? What choice will allow me to be better off or will lead me to be better off? Right? That's what rationality is. And rational choice theory assumes that all human beings are rational creatures. And since human beings are rational creatures, they calculate, they try to maximize, they also do order preferencing. What does it mean? It means, let's say, if, let's say, uh, let's look at, let's say, cars. Let's say brands of cars. Let's say, uh, Toyota is better than Nissan. Okay? And Honda is better than Toyota. So therefore, Honda is also better than Nissan. Get the point? There's a kind of preferencing. Okay? And you could calculate that. Okay? Yeah, very rational choice theory is very exciting. And its main assumption is basically methodological individualism. The individual is the main unit of analysis. It's a main unit of analysis. But it could also analyze societies. But they simply see societies as social aggregates, meaning to say, aggregation of individual choices or preferences, nothing more. Right? As opposed to methodological collectivism in sociology, that society is the main unit of analysis. Right? In rational choice theory, no, it's not the society, it's the individual. And what's happening in the society is just simply an aggregation of individual choices and individual preferences. Okay? So, it also presupposes, rational choice theory also presupposes that human beings are not just simply rational, not just simply maximizers, they're not just, their preferences cannot just simply be ordered, but human beings are also self-interested creatures. Meaning to say, the notion of self-interest plays a vital role on how decisions are made. Okay? Let's say, for instance, if you're trying to make a choice, you'll be rational. But at the end of the day, you're being rational because you want to preserve yourself. You want to simply serve your own self-interest. And that assumption is normal to human beings. Being rational and being self-interested is the main assumption of rational choice theories. And from there, they could predict outcomes. Given a certain set of constraints, rational choice theories could actually, explain causes and effects. It could explain causal mechanisms on how an independent variable could influence the dependent variable, and it could also predict. It could also predict. Okay, that is why in a rational choice theory, formal modeling has become very important. Formal modeling or modeling based on logic, because there is a good starting point for theorizing or for analyzing the political. And the starting point is the assumption that human beings are rational, they're maximizers, they can order their preferences, and they are self-interested. And from there, given a certain set of constraints, you can predict how a human being would react. Let's say, for instance, we're so fond of analyzing political dynasties through the use of, let's say, patron-client, frameworks, clientelism, patronage, But you could also analyze it through the framework of rational choice theory. Because politicians, just like everyone else, are rational creatures. And being rational creatures, they're maximizers, and they're also self-interested. just like everybody else. So this phenomenon is not limited to politicians alone. Right? So let's say, oh, so you're a politician. Let's say you're a mayor of a particular town, and let's say your term is ending, and your opponent is also fighting for the position of mayorship in your town. Would you want that to happen? Would you turn over the position or the authority of being a mayor to someone who is your enemy, the political opposition perhaps? Or you could just turn it over to your wife. Because there are also incentives, right? By the way, incentives are very important. We are rational creatures. We are self-interested. We're maximizers. And so we are heavily motivated by incentives. We behave in accordance with the proper incentives at hand. So say for instance, returning to my example, let's say the town mayor is confronted with an option to turn over the seat to a political opponent or to his wife, or if not the wife, perhaps the eldest son, right? Because if ever that the political opposition will win, then their access to resources, both political, economic, and even social, could be cut off, and that's not a very good incentive, right? And so being rational and self-interested, you just opt to prefer your wife or your eldest son to succeed you in the office rather than a political opposition, or rather than someone who is your enemy. So you get the point, right? The assumption human beings are rational and self-interested is very powerful, in the sense that it's very logical, very commonsensical, and so it could logically provide a prediction and an explanation on the motivations behind political behavior. Okay, and another very important thing in rational choice theory is the issue of collective action, or the logic behind collective action. See, here's the thing. If we talk about social aggregates, meaning to say social level, not just the individual, we believe that for rational choice theorists, how the society works is basically through the individual decision making of its members, right? And the logic of collective action is a very essential concept within the rational theory framework. It seeks to explain why individuals often fail to cooperate. See, the thing with the collective action problem is the issue of cooperation. Why is that? Why is it an issue? It's an issue because, let's say, when we cooperate, chances are we will be better off. If we try to do our part, or do our part within the social framework, then chances are we will be better off. But the thing is, how come not so many of us want to participate? How come not so many of us wants to cooperate? See, that's the problem. This is the issue of the collective action problem. So if you try to define the collective action problem, right, it arises in a situation where individuals share a common interest in achieving a particular goal, but each individual has an incentive to free ride. It has an incentive to free ride. Meaning to say, in your mind, even if you don't participate, even if you don't really do your job, others would not notice, and others would still do it for you, right? And so, why would you exert effort to fulfill your responsibility within the community, right? A very good example of this is, let's say, environmental problems. Later on, uh, we're going to mention the environmental problem as the epitome of the collective action problem. The thing there is that, let's say we have a responsibility to take care of the environment. All of us, all of us have the responsibility to take care of the environment, and yet, not many of us is doing it. Let's say, the rule is you have to throw your trash to the proper trash bin, right? Biodegradable, non-biodegradable, and what have you. Okay, these types of categories. How come many of us are not following that simple rule? We all know that if we do fulfill our jobs, all of us will fulfill our responsibilities to the environment, then the world will be a better place, and certainly we're gonna be better off compared to what we are now. But how come not everyone's doing it? Well, here are the reasons. Number one, no one's gonna notice. You'll not be punished if you don't throw your trash properly. And what comes to your mind is that other people are also doing it. And since other people are also doing it, then no, might as well not do it myself. Right? If they are not doing it, why would I exert effort to do it as well? Right? So that's the problem. And another thing, if there's a benefit to it, we're gonna reap the benefit anyway. Right? We're gonna reap the benefit anyway. We're gonna be, enjoying the benefit anyway, even if we follow the norm or not. These are the things that cross our mind. And this is a disaster when it comes to the collective action problem, to the logic of collective action. There's this political economist, and his name is Mancor Olson. Very brilliant guy. In 1965, he published a book, The Logic of Collective Action. And he provides a systematic analysis of the challenges of organizing collective action. The thing is, okay, we all know that we need to act cohesively in order for us to be better off in a society, because we're living together, right? So in a way, we have to synchronize our actions so that we're moving in the same direction. We're moving forward towards the same direction. And that's gonna be better. If we do that, we're gonna be better off. And yet, as the logic of collective action tells us, that's not what happens. Most especially in large groups. In small groups, the logic of, or the issue of collective action is not as prominent. Why? Because you'll be easily pinpointed as the free rider. You'll be ostracized, you'll be marginalized, you could even be penalized if you're living in a small group. That's why if you're living in a small community, chances are you're more cooperative. When you know each other, you know all your neighbors, everyone in the community, chances are if there is let's say a program there, you're gonna join, you're gonna participate, you're going to cooperate and do your job. Why? Because other people will see you. If they see you not doing your job, then you could be ostracized. Right? They're gonna tell bad things about you. But in a large community, where it's very, very difficult to do surveillance. See? You don't know who your neighbors are. You don't care who your neighbors are. They don't care who you are. They don't care what you're doing. Then, the problem of collective action becomes more prominent, according to Mancur also. Which is very logical. Very logical. But we could actually do some things in order to, mitigate it, even for a bit. Man could also will say, there are things that we could do, right? In order for us to, even if we are confronted with the collective action problem, man could also tells us there are ways which we could devise, and one of them is basically incentives, right? Providing for incentives. That's why I tell you a while ago, incentives are very powerful. Selective incentives are private benefits that are offered to individuals who contribute to the collective good. And these incentives can be positive in the form of rewards, and it could be negative in the form of punishments. Right? So if you want people to follow a certain mandate within a large community, you could provide material benefits. That if you follow this, you could gain, goods, services, or even money. There's also solidary benefits. These are social rewards like recognition. Like, if you cooperate, if you do well in the society, then people will recognize you. Oh, you're a good person. Right? And that in itself is a reward. And there's also purposive incentives. These are intrinsic rewards, such as a sense of satisfaction, a sense of fulfillment that in a way you were able to contribute to the betterment of the society. Right? These incentives are powerful. These incentives are powerful. Right? For instance, let's say there's a public radio station which offers tote bags for those or other merchandises, like, let's say, figures, or action figures, or any kind of memorabilia for that purpose, for the listeners to donate in a particular drive. Let's say there's a calamity that happened, and there's this radio station who wants to have a donation drive. So to incentivize that, the radio station can provide incentives, like, they could give memorabilia, they could give, items, which could incentivize. Oh, if you do your job, if you donate, if you help us, then you're gonna receive this one. Yeah, that's an example of an incentive. And of course, the other one is coercion. Coercion provides the use of legal sanctions to compel individuals to participate in collective action. Legal actions. Of course, this involves laws already, because laws are punitive in nature, meaning to say, if you don't follow it, you're gonna be penalized. And if you're penalized, you're not gonna be better off, right? That's not a very good incentive for you, right? So might as well follow the law. Another thing to help with the problem of collective action is social norms, right? Social norms are shared values that encourage cooperation, and it discourages free riding. Like, let's say, the notion of pagkakaisa, or bayanihan, or unity, right? Which we see during the pandemic in what do you call this? Yung hapag, yung community pantry, right? This is a very good example of social norms, like notions of bayanihan, camaraderie, pakikisama, right? Pakikiisa, pagkakaisa, or unity. Right? These social norms are very important because people tend to internalize these social norms as values. And when they internalize it, they will come to believe that that's the right thing to do. Right? And it's very powerful. It's very powerful. Now, I already alluded to this a while ago, that the epitome of the collective action problem is basically the problem of the environment. They're a classic example of collective action problems, because they involve situations where individual actions, when aggregated, lead to a kind of negative outcome for everyone. And yet, no single individual has strong enough incentive to change their behavior unilaterally. You know that if we do the right thing when it comes to the environment, everyone's gonna be better off. And yet, we're not doing, enough. Just like, problems on pollution, problems on climate change, right? We know that climate change is very real. We all know that uh, the world is becoming very hot. We need to do something about it, and yet there are very few who are willing to cooperate. Well, because there are a lot of problems to it. Right? There are a lot of problems to it. Why? Um, you see, most especially when it comes to uh, other countries. If you look at it, the industrialized nations were really the first ones who destroyed the environment because their industry, their factories, burning fuels, producing a lot of carbon, are, the first dagger against the ozone layer, against the environment. And yet now, the poorer countries are following their lead, starting to industrialize. And then suddenly they would not allow it. Suddenly, there's gonna be a reprimand against these actions. So, the other nation will say, well, you're the ones who started destroying the environment. How come, right now that you've already industrialized, you're going to reprimand us, or you're going to regulate us? That's the thing, right? That's the problem. And the thing about the problem with the environment is that there's an externality, right? Meaning to say, um, the negative impact or the negative outcome will be shouldered by those who did not directly participate in the transaction. Okay? Um, Kumbaga, you're not a part of this and yet you're the one suffering. Just like climate change. I mean, the industrialized countries were really the ones who, in the 18th, 19th century started destroying the environment. And yet the poor countries now are the ones suffering for it because we have poor countries don't have good health care. They don't have good facilities. You know, uh, research and development is uh, not really seen as essential in poor countries, and so these things provide for the reasons why, when it comes to calamities, poor countries become very vulnerable. Okay, but there could be possible solutions, like for instance, international agreements. Um, in a treaty, they could try to enforce the mandate of a treaty to protect the environment. An example of it is the Paris Agreement or the Montreal Protocol. They could also, or states could also regulate factories, right? They could provide incentives for those who would, change their manufacturing strategy or the technology that they're using, so that they could lessen the carbon imprint. There could be laws that could be implemented, like the Clean Air Act, right? They could tax carbon emission. These factories that are, providing carbon emissions could be taxed at a higher rate, right? So these things, we all know that there's a problem when it comes to the collective action, and yet there are also avenues through which we could devise ways to mitigate these problems. Now, um, let's talk about what's wrong with rational choice theory. So we've seen how important rational choice theory is, how powerful it is as a theoretical approach in studying the political. But just like behavioralism, it's not foolproof. Just like behavioralism, it also has a lot of, what shall we say, downside. Critics of rational choice theory believe that the notion of rationality is actually bounded. This was developed by Herbert Simon, which recognizes that individuals are not perfectly rational, but rather exhibit bounded reality. This means that their decision making is constrained by cognitive limitations and even incomplete information and time constraints. The thing is, okay, we're rational creatures, we maximize, we're utilitarians, and so on and so forth. Okay, that's a given. But the thing is, how sure are you that you were really able to look into all the possible options? How sure are you that you were able to calculate through and through, and you would know exactly what would happen if you do this or if you do that? The information that you have, for all we know, might be incomplete. Right? Example, there's a voter deciding who to vote for the election. But the voter may not have the time, or let's say the resources, to fully research the candidates. Right? So, the decision may not be completely rational, but just simply bounded rationality. Right? When you're deciding, let's say, who to support for. Let's say there are a lot of politicians vying for support. Now, how would you know whether you're going to support a politician or not if you have incomplete information? Right? You don't really know what that politician is doing under the table, supposedly. Right? You cannot read the mind of that politician. You don't know whether that politician is just simply trying to persuade you, or is he really very truthful? Right? Well, another problem is cognitive bias, because human beings we are also cognitively biased. Psychological phenomenon such as confirmation bias, for instance, is a good example of this. Right? So we have a lot of cognitive bias when it comes to our judgment, when it comes to our worldview, our religious perspectives, our political perspectives, our values, our customs, the way we were brought up into this world, our orientation in the family. All these things play a vital role in our decision making. And sometimes these biases might lead us to suboptimal choices. Right? That's the problem. Okay? Another critique against rational choice theory is also the neglect for social and cultural factors. Rational choice theorists tend to focus more on the notion of rationality, self-interest, incentives, constraints, modeling, and so on and so forth. And yet, sometimes they tend to forget that there are also social and cultural norms that tend to influence the decision making of people. Like there are emotions, for instance. A person could be emotional. If a person is emotional when that person decided on a particular choice, then certainly that choice might not be rational, might not even benefit his self-interest, might even harm that person in the long run. So you see, there are other things that could be at play here. Right? The thing about rational choice theory at times is that it may oversimplify human motivation. Before we're talking about behavioralism, as you know, behavioralism tends to be reductionist, right? Now we're talking about rational choice theory as a kind of oversimplification of human motivation, because there could be other things that are motivating us other than our self-interest, right? Rather than just simply incentives. Just say, for instance, altruism and empathy. Some of us are just really good and kind-hearted people, right? Wants to do the right thing even if there is no incentive. Even if there's no good consequence for them, they're just simply trying to do it because of their, let's say, moral upbringing or values. But rational choice theory tend to overlook these things. Okay? And the framework of rational choice theory, the notion of preferences, is the assumption is that it's exogenous, meaning to say they're just there, right? The impulse is just there to act rationally. The impulse is just there to serve your own self-interest. But the thing is, decision making might be endogenous, right? When you decide on something, there are a lot of factors within the individual that is at play, like worldview, like educational background, like emotional state of mind or psychological state of mind at that point in time when the individual is trying to make a choice. So all these things are endogenous and not necessarily a given, right? So those are the criticisms against rational choice theory. But rational choice theory has evolved. When it was starting in the 70s, it was a kind of, a kind of imperialistic pursuit that, these people would try to dominate the field of, political science, and they would try to, in a way, ostracize those who are not into this kind of methodology. But right now, that is no longer the case. We are moving towards a more eclectic political science. And so, rational choice theory, as a method or as an approach to studying the political, could be integrated or could be used side by side other approaches to political science. It could be used side by side by, let's say, institutionalism. Right? We could combine rational choice principles with institutional analysis, recognizing that institutions shape the incentives and constraints faced by individuals. See, that's an example of a fusion between the principles of rational choice theory and institutionalism. Because within the rules of the game, in an institutional approach, there are incentives and constraints. And these incentives and constraints provide a framework for decision making for individuals. You could even combine rational choice and behavioralism. You could even combine constructivism and rational choice. So, we're moving towards the direction of being more eclectic. Eclectic in the sense that, we're being more pragmatic in our approach. Gone are the days that, scholars are saying it's about rational choice theory. We have to calculate through this and that, formal modeling, etc. Right now, that's no longer the case. Rational choice theories are more open to collaboration and cooperation with the other approaches to political science.